Is God a hypocrite? Welcome to day 6 of our 1000 days of Revealing Christ challenge. We all know the phrase, do as I say and not as I do. That is the mark of a bad leader. It is the mark of a hypocrite. A hypocrite will tell you to do as they say and not as they do. But have you ever stopped to think that many of us subconsciously view God that way? We think God commands us to be forgiving while He is free to hold grudges and revenge. We think God tells us to be non-violent while He can go ahead and be violent. Anyway, He is God, He can do whatever He wants. We think God tells us to love our enemies while He can hate them for us, or while He Himself hates His enemies. In fact, many of us, under the guise of false humility, will tell someone who has done something wrong to you, nimekuachia Mungu. Translation, I have left you in the hands of God. At that moment, what we are expecting is that God will punish them for us. At that moment, what we are expecting is that God will make them suffer more than we could have made them suffer. That just proves how far and how low our understanding of God is. You see, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus completely destroys the idea of a hypocritical God. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 44 to 45, Jesus tells his listeners, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say unto you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Look very carefully at the reason Jesus gave for giving this command. He says, so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For He causes His sun to rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain to the righteous and the unrighteous. Jesus is saying, do this because this is what your dad is like. If loving our enemies makes us look like the Father, then the Father must be someone who loves his enemies. If turning the other cheek when slapped is what makes us look like our Father, then it means that our Father does not revenge. Then it means that the Father does not repay evil for evil. You see, we often look at the 10 commandments as rules for human beings. But what if they are much more than that? What if they are descriptions of God? God says, do not kill because He is life. God says, do not steal because He is a giver. God says, do not bear false witness because He is the truth. If God commands us not to do what He does, then He is a hypocrite. If God commands us to do what He does not do, then He must be a hypocrite. But because we've been saying that Jesus is the perfect image of God, He is the only credible witness to the true nature and the character of God, Jesus dismantled the idea of a hypocritical God. He commands us to be like our Father who is in heaven. Hey, but Ian, what about judgment? Hold on. What you mean is Jesus told us not to judge, but God is the judge. What you mean is Jesus told us not to judge, but God judges. You see, Jesus clarified that too. In John chapter 5, verse 22, Jesus clearly said, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to His Son. Okay, then that means that Jesus judges. Hold on. How does Jesus judge? In John chapter 12, verse 31, Jesus says, now is the judgment of this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. Verse 32, listen to this very carefully. And I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all to myself. Your Bible there probably says will draw all men or people. And if your Bible is the King James Version or the New King James, that word men or people is in italics, meaning it was not there in the beginning. And so I think the translators got it wrong. The context here is judgment. And so I believe when Jesus says, and I, when I am lifted from the earth, will draw all to myself, He means He will draw all judgment to Himself. In fact, when you look at the Berean Bible, it puts it very well. And if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all to myself. All what? Not necessarily all people, although even that makes sense because of the conversation that is happening there. I believe Jesus meant when he be lifted up, he will draw all judgment on himself. So when Jesus was on that cross, he drew all judgment upon himself. So on that cross, Jesus judged the world, not by killing the world, not by condemning the world, but by dying for the world. He condemned sin in his own flesh so that all could go free. So even judging, when Jesus says do not judge, it is because God also does not judge. So in essence, God cannot tell you to do what he himself does not do. God is not a hypocrite. So if you see a picture in the Old Testament, of God in the Old Testament that looks like a killer, a thief, a destroyer, a judge, remember this: God does not break his own standard. There is an explanation for those verses. But be sure of one thing: the explanation will never turn God into a hypocrite. We imitate Christ because Christ imitates the Father, and the Father is good. Remember to subscribe. Remember to follow. Remember to like. Leave your comments. And if you've been blessed by this, share. See you tomorrow.